Chen. I'm the founder of the environmental justice educational campaign Anti-Racist Planet.
Hi, I'm Eva Geierstanger. I'm the leader of Plastic Free Gen Z, a San Diego-based youth-led plastic awareness campaign. Welcome to the Plastic Pollution Coalition Countdown to COP26, led by the youth ambassadors of PPC. Plastic Pollution Coalition is a growing global alliance of more than 1,200 organizations, businesses, and thought leaders in 75 different countries working toward a just, equitable world free of plastic pollution and its toxic impact on humans, animals, waterways, the ocean, and the environment.
Today we have the privilege of interviewing Alexis Goldsmith. Alexis is from Indiana and is a grassroots organizer. She is a community organizing consultant for Beyond Plastics and co-founded the Hudson River Mohawk Environmental Action Network, a grassroots organization advocating for environmental justice and indigenous rights along the Hudson River.
Thank you so much for being here, Alexis. So let's get started.
Thank you for having me.
So our first question is, how has your upbringing in Indiana inspired your work with farming and agriculture?
Well, I love Indiana. I love the land that I come from, and I think it's a really unique place. Like any place that you could come from has its own unique ecosystems, and I feel really inspired to protect that land and help it thrive ecologically, especially given the environmental challenges that we're facing today. Indiana used to be mostly wetlands, which is a unique ecosystem, but 85% of Indiana's wetlands have been developed or converted into farmlands, and that has had an enormous impact on water quality, flooding, and loss of biodiversity. So I have some unique political ideas of how that could be solved, one of which is Indiana is a lot of agricultural land for commodity crops that are subsidized by the US government, such as wheat and corn and soybeans. But why can't the government subsidize restoring ecosystems, paying farmers who might have 200, 300, 400 acres to restore some of that acreage to its original purpose of wetlands or hardwood forest or some, native planting native species that would support biodiversity, things like that, because that would be very beneficial and generate a lot of value, much like commodity crops do. So long story short, I love Indiana and I do love agriculture.
That's amazing. And you also work with Beyond Plastics. You're on their, leadership board. So what are some of your proudest accomplishments with Beyond Plastics?
Well, with Beyond Plastics, I am helping to build the grassroots movement to address plastic pollution, which is a systemic problem that intersects with many of the other challenges, social and environmental justice challenges that we're facing. So I really love when I see people in communities that I am working with getting involved at with their political leaders, with their representatives, meeting with their representatives, holding rallies, or maybe holding community meetings, things that they haven't done before, and they're talking about plastic pollution. And we have been able to get some of these communities to get their federal representatives to co-sponsor the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, which is a national bill that was introduced in 2021. And this is the most comprehensive plastic pollution bill to ever be introduced into Congress. And it's also been introduced in the Senate. And it addresses the upstream source of plastic, because plastic is a production issue and not a consumption issue. So I really love building the grassroots movement and working directly with communities on the ground.
How does the program and curriculum work at Beyond Plastics?
So we are a team of policy experts and organizers. Our president, Judith Enck, is the former EPA regional administrator for EPA Region 2. And she teaches a class at Bennington College on plastic pollution specifically, with a focus on public action. So this is teaching people about the problem, but also how to get involved politically to fix it. So that's really unique. And it's also filling the need in connecting plastic pollution to the climate crisis and to social and environmental justice and international social and environmental justice. And then people become really, really motivated to do something about it, which is where I come in and our team comes in to organize those people to start writing letters to the editor, contacting their representatives, organizing to protect environmental justice communities, and things like that.
Yeah. As a white person, how do you acknowledge your privilege and make space for Black, Indigenous, people of color within the environmental justice movement?
Of course, this is a really important question. And of course, it starts with acknowledging your privilege, acknowledging the land that you're on, as belonging to an Indigenous group, learning about which Indigenous group comes from that land. I'm from Indiana, but I live in a place called Cambridge, New York, and that is Mohican land, and it belongs to the Stockbridge-Munsee Mohican community. So first is acknowledgement, and then amplifying BIPOC voices in the fights that they are in and the intersectional issues with environmental justice, because it's not just trying to protect the environment or prevent harm to the environment. It's protecting those communities and protecting the wellness of Black and brown bodies, and acknowledging that because they are disproportionately impacted, their wellness is disproportionately impacted. Their stress is much higher. The demands on their personal lives are much higher, and they need protection, especially now. For example, with Hurricane Ida hitting Louisiana so hard, there are communities there that are fighting for MOSA plastics, for example, in St. James, Louisiana, and many of those people have been fighting petrochemical complexes for years, and now they have lost their homes. So this is you can feel helpless sometimes because I'm so far away from them. I can donate to them and amplify their stories, but we need systemic change at all levels of government, and we need systemic change in the media to really make the public understand that systemic racism and environmental racism go hand in hand. And 400 years ago, when this country was first colonized, or it's been longer than 400 years, but this land was stolen, and it wasn't just stolen from the people who lived 400 years ago, it was stolen from their descendants as well, who are still alive and who are still here, and who still have culture here. And so you have to constantly talk about it and have really uncomfortable conversations, and just know that it's going to be uncomfortable and it needs addressing.
Going back to the situation with Hudson River, what's the current situation with the toxicity of that river?
Right. So here's another sad story. I just mentioned colonization, and the area of the Hudson River that I live around is the Stockbridge-Munsee Mohican community, and their name for the river is the Mohican Tuck, which means a river that flows both ways. And they call themselves the people of the river that flow both ways. So that land was taken from them, and then the river was developed with industry without regard for what dumping chemicals into the river means. There was a very famous case of GE dumping PCBs in the river, and that turned it into a Superfund site, and the river is still not safe to eat fish out of, and probably never will be along that stretch, which is a real tragedy. If you see the river, it's so beautiful, and it's hard to imagine all the value that was lost. And the other issue with the river is that the ongoing colonization is still happening. In the city of Troy, New York, which is right on the Hudson River. There is a 10-acre stretch of the river that is still forested, that has artifacts on it that are thousands of years old, from the Mohican people, from the Schaghticoke First Nation people. And a developer wants to clear and blast that forest and turn it into apartment complexes. And the community in Troy, the citizens of Troy, have built a huge grassroots campaign to save that forest and pressure the city to not develop it. And it's an ongoing fight. The city is very resistant to saving the forest, which I think is the wrong decision, given that the land was taken from those indigenous people in the first place, and they're still here. They're still alive. They reside in Wisconsin now, but they do travel to their ancestral lands for spiritual purposes and to reconnect with their ancestors. And they don't want to see that forest destroyed, I think, understandably. So the Hudson River, there's a lot of layers of history to it, but I do love the river. It deserves love. It needs healing. All of our rivers need healing.
You touched upon this a bit earlier. You've made a large impact with your work as an environmental journalist. Pollution does have the largest impact on BIPOC communities. As a journalist, have you noticed any shifts in media coverage of such disproportionate impacts, and where do you see room for improvement?
It really depends on where you get your news. Some are better than others. Some are just cursory. I think the trend in mainstream media is, yes, they have been reporting more on systemic racism and disproportionate impacts of systemic racism, but I find that mainstream media is very reluctant to put things into context of our colonialist history, and put things into context of the legacy that slavery has left on our country. So without that context, it's very difficult to understand just how systemic racism is in this country and how that impacts the environmental challenges that we have today. For example, when you have a Superfund site, for example, and you need to raise a lot of tax money to clean it up, I think it's helpful to acknowledge that that land was stolen from an indigenous group in the first place, who cared for it, who grew thriving ecosystems on it, who grew food forests on it, and then it was taken from them and harmed in that way. So putting things into context, acknowledging colonialism's lasting legacy on these issues is something that I wish the media would do more often. But I really do love independent media. I love Democracy Now! Out of New York City. They're an excellent independent news program. And of course, the Sanctuary for Independent Media, where I used to report out of Troy, New York.
Moving to a different kind of aspect of our discussion, how likely is the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act? How likely is it that it will be implemented? It will be passed and implemented. And then a second question following that is, what do you see as the next steps beyond the act?
There are many other places, let's just say, where there are extremes in the political spectrum, and it is causing people to not be able to agree on anything. Even the established science of the climate crisis is real, and we're all eating plastic as a result of plastic pollution. So first, I think there needs to be some healing to move past this moment, and to calm the moment down, because there's a lot of volatile energy going around that is making it difficult to make progress anywhere. That being said, we really do need some of the provisions in this act, including the moratorium on new federal permits for plastic production facilities, and the ban on certain single-use items, the national bottle bill. There are just so many provisions that would really improve quality of life for environmental justice communities, that would really prevent ocean pollution and protect wildlife. And it's really just, but it is the first steps to solving the plastic pollution crisis. Beyond the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, we really need to stop the build out of fossil fuel and petrochemical infrastructure in this country, because they go hand in hand.
And our last question, also about policy, what are some feasible commitments that you'd like to see come out of COP26?
Yeah, so this is another one where I am not sure whether we will be able to get any commitments, but we need to stop fossil fuel development, period. We need to stop taking fossil fuels out of the ground and stop the build out of fossil fuel infrastructure. We need to protect the ecosystems that we have left and restore ecosystems that have been damaged. We need to listen to indigenous peoples and BIPOC peoples and listen to their stories and let them lead on this, especially because indigenous peoples make up 5% of the world's population, but protect 80% of the world's biodiversity. So we need to trust that they have the knowledge to lead us in this. And I would like to see some commitments to environmental justice, some reparations for people that have been harmed by pollution.
Alexis, thank you so much for talking with us today and sharing your work and your perspective. We're really honored to have you and to have had the opportunity to speak with you on this big, big issue. So we look forward to creating a more just and equitable world with you. Thank you so much for your time, and we hope that you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. And I would just like to say, if you want to learn more about Beyond Plastics, our website is beyondplastics.org. If you want to get involved, beyondplastics.org/contact. And my email is alexisgoldsmith@bennington.edu. And I always love to hear from people, talk to people. So thank you so much, Eva and Amber.
Thank you.